This video is going to cover the beginning of the skeletal system. There'll be two videos. I'm going to split these in half. Once again, this is more of a review. I'm going to show some of the terminology, and then I'll show you where you can find some of the information regarding this. As far as functions for bones, and that's what we're covering here. We're covering more how do bones form, what are their functions, where do they start from, that kind of thing. So here are some general functions. They are a major support. That's what gives a person their shape, allows a person to move, and they'll move. It's number 3 here. But it's skeletal muscles pulling on joints at angles that allow a person to move, talk, do that kind of thing. Protection, of course, the cranium, ribs, all protect sternum, protect major organs. And like I said, big time support and movement functions. As far as storage goes, bones contain calcium and phosphate ions, and those are exchanged at times. If there's times when the body needs more calcium in blood, they're absorbed from bones. When there are storage areas for calcium, and so they're a major storage area for minerals. And yes, red bone marrow produces all blood cells after a person is born. Prior to that, as a fetus, the liver, and there's an area called the yolk sac that actually makes blood cells. But after birth, red bone marrow, and there's two kinds of marrow. There's yellow and red, and we'll get to yellow. Yellow is a storage area for adipose. But red bone marrow produces all blood cells. Okay, as far as classification, now there are 206 bones. That seems to be the standard. And there are 2 PowerPoints of this section. This one is actually from a textbook, and this one just has some random pictures, a little bit more colorful. But it's showing here there are some categories. Let me see. Okay. There are some categories of bones, and the same with this one. Let me click over here. Let's see. All right, that does at least break down a long bone. I think I'm going to stay with this page. And so as far as categories go, you have long bones. This is considered a flat bone. This is an irregular shaped bone. This right here under E, it says sesamoid, so it's kind of combining that under short. And then this up here, which is a talus, is considered a short bone. So to give you some examples, and if you watch this video, if you want to write these down, that's fine. But flat bones, the scapula is considered a flat bone. The bones of the skull, ribs are considered a flat bone as well. Short bones would be carpals and tarsals. Wrist bones are carpals. Tarsals are ankle bones, and that's what that one there is, a short bone. This is actually a skull bone. It's hard to see that, but it's a flat bone. And then this is the femur, which is a long bone, and this is an irregular shape, and that's a sesamoid. Now, we don't actually have sesamoid as part of the short bone. That's fine. A sesamoid bone, like it says there, they're found in areas that are adjacent to tendons and joints. The patella, which is what that bone right there is an example of a sesamoid. Believe it or not, a person can have their patella taken out. They lose a lot of strength in their legs because the patella creates a little bit higher angle, so the quads have a little bit more pull. Now, as far as long bones go, and you have to know the parts of a long bone. Long bones are femur, tibia, fibula, humerus, radius, ulna, so arm and leg bones. This particular PowerPoint actually has all the parts of a long bone. So if you start where what's called the epiphysis, which are the ends, see how they're larger, they're called swollen ends, and where it says epiphyseal plates, that's the epiphysis. Now this is called the proximal and distal epiphysis. This happens to be a femur, but every long bone would have a distal and proximal. Now if you remember, proximal means closest to the point of attachment. Distal is further away. This is where the hip would be. This is the head of the femur. So this is, of course, the proximal end. The distal end, this would be like the end of the thigh connecting to the tibia, the lower leg bone. This area here, called the diaphysis, which is the shaft, and it is hollow. And this is yellow marrow, and that's where bone marrow is found. But the hollow area is called the medullary cavity, and it's actually created by a bone cell called an osteoclast. Osteoblasts are bone-forming cells, and they actually form the exterior of these bones. But this middle section that's hollow is formed by something called an osteoclast. What you're seeing there is spongy bone with the holes, and then this on the outside is called compact bone. Articular cartilage would be the hyaline cartilage on the ends of these long bones. That's the part that actually, when it breaks down, that's the beginnings of arthritis. The periosteum is an outside layer, and I'm sorry that picture is so small. See it being pulled back here? It's an outside layer of connective tissue that forms as a bone is developing. It actually connects to the tendons that connect to muscles that connect to bones. The endosteum would be the inside lining of the medullary cavity. So there's a layer of connective tissue on the inside of this hollow portion. Trabeculae are these little openings that are found in spongy bone, and like I was saying, this is called yellow marrow. There's actually red marrow as well, and those are found in the hollow portion. Now, red marrow can be found also in the ends called the epiphysis. So everything I just went over is right here. The epiphyseal plate is sometimes called the growth plate. All bones start out as hyaline cartilage, and then they develop from there prior to being born. Then after they're born, what's left of that hyaline cartilage model is called an epiphyseal plate, or disc. I've heard it referred to as that also. So let me see if I can make this bigger. So see the ends here? Now these are the epiphyseal plates. It's basically showing these are ossified. This is a bone that's in full length. But right there, as a person is developing and growing, these epiphyseal discs, they're hyaline cartilage, and growth hormones are a hormone that keeps them as hyaline cartilage until a certain age. I mean, a person grows until their 20s. Now, males, females are different. Females reach peak height early 20s at the latest. Males can grow in the mid-20s, but at some point, these completely ossify, and that means that person is done growing in height. Showed you the diaphysis, the shaft, the medullary cavity is the hollow portion. The endosteum would be the inside lining of the endosteum. The periosteum is the outside layer that covers the external surface of a bone. And then examples. This is asking for examples of long bones. Like I said, humerus, radius ulna, and then femur, tibia, fibula. Irregular bones are the vertebrae, the sacrum, and the coccyx, the tailbones. It's not showing it here, but that's a vertebrae. That's actually a thoracic vertebrae. It's got the long nose. So those are some examples. Bone histology. Now, I should have a picture for this as well. Let's stay with the same. Yeah, that one's okay. That may have to do. I'm going to stay with this one. So what you have, now you looked at this with the bone tissue and histology. This is compact bone, and this with the holes is called spongy bone. And you can see here's some compact bone, and then see the inside of this medullary cavity, there's some compact bone. And if you noticed, if I can go back up, there, see those openings? That's all spongy bone. So a little bit about bone histology, and we'll get to this in a second. Central canal is this opening here. That's where the blood vessels and nerves are located. Now, bone is very dense, so oxygen cannot diffuse out inside of a bone. So what ends up happening is, here are the little bone cells. They're sitting, and that's what this is out here, these little dark spots. They're called lacuna. And let me see if I have on my other PowerPoint. I do have an x-ray. There's an epiphyseal plate or disc. That's a hyaline cartilage disc. But, well, here we go. This is an up close of, this is basically this thing here that is blown up huge. There's the central canal. Those little depressions, and they are depressions, they look like holes, but they're actually depression. That's called a lacuna. You see it there, and that's where you find the osteocytes. Now, the lines between the lacuna are called canaliculi. These lines here, and that's what I was saying. The osteocytes, when they lay down bone, compact bone, it's in a circular pattern. That's why this osteon, that's why these look like little trees that are cut in half. And the lines between there are called canaliculi, little tunnels, and they connect these osteocytes to the blood in the central canal, because bone is too dense for anything to diffuse through that. All right, so I showed you what an osteon is. I know there's a blank here. Central canal has large blood vessels and nerves, and that's what, I'm going to stay with this PowerPoint. That's what this is, and see if I can get a little bigger. There, see the red and the blue? That's a vein and an artery, and the yellow would be a nerve, so that's the central canal. Those little dark areas are lacuna that have an osteocyte, so that's a lacuna there. You see it, and it has little osteocytes. You see the nucleus, those are bone cells. And yes, it's laying down a circular pattern, and then here's the red artery, the blue vein. Those are central canals, and they're connected by this part that's called a perforating canal or Vogtman's canal. So bone has a very good blood supply. You can see that big arteries. If you break a bone, it bleeds, it gets blue colored. Here is spongy bone with the openings that are called trabeculae, and you see how the vessels go between that. Spongy bone actually helps make the skeleton a little bit lighter. Now this is important. The bone matrix has three things. It's got collagen for strength. So that's where that is. Adult bones are more rigid than children's bones. But the collagen part gives bone some strength. Now collagen is a protein that's found in ligaments, tendons. Anyway, it's very strong. The part of bone that's rigid, and you know this, bones are hard on the outside. Calcium phosphate, calcium carbonate. So bone matrix, the areas between these cells, I'm sorry to keep bouncing back and forth, but all the area here between the bone cells is the matrix part, or the extracellular matrix. It's got three things: calcium carbonate, calcium phosphate, and collagen. Calcium is the rigid portion, collagen is for strength, but children's bones have more collagen. So when they break, a lot of times they don't break completely off. As far as bone cells go, there really are three types. Now there's an osteocyte, which is a bone cell. But you have osteoblasts that are bone forming cells, and osteoclasts that are bone absorbing, or it's called bone resorption is another way of saying it. This absorbs bone material. Osteoblast produces new bone material. Everyone's skeleton has this going on constantly. About 5 to 6% of a person's skeleton every year gets remodeled. It gets absorbed and replaced. And I showed you the lacuna, the central canal, the canaliculi. Once again, I'll blow this up. So there's the central canal there, and there's two more central canals. The canaliculi are little bitty lines that connect the lacuna that has the osteocytes, and these are osteocytes. Once an osteoblast has produced bone material all around it, they become dormant and they turn into an osteocyte. And then, like I said, you have osteoclasts that during bone development and also afterwards that absorb bone. I showed you a perforating canal or Vogtman's canal. Those connect between the two central canals. It's called a perforating canal. Cancellous or spongy bone and compact bone. So spongy bone has more spaces in it. The spaces are called trabeculae. See if I can make this bigger. And didn't mean to do that. Well, anyway, make it big again. See the spaces in there? That's spongy bone. And all bones have a core of spongy bone and then a layer of compact on the outside. Now these long bones have hollow areas called the medullary cavity. But that's the general setup for a bone. There's a core of spongy bone followed by a thinner layer of compact bone on the outside. Bone marrow. Now I have a slide for this. Red bone marrow produces all of the blood cells after a person is born. So it produces erythrocytes, leukocytes, and platelets, which are called thrombocytes. There is a really good picture, and I strictly got this right off the internet. It says normal bone marrow conversion. It says infant. This is 1 year or less than 1 year, and this is showing an adult after 25 years. Yeah, kids, the bones of kids have a huge percentage of red bone marrow. In fact, almost all bones do. The textbook says most bones in kids have red bone marrow, but as you get older, it's only found in certain locations. Because there's a point where you stop growing. You don't have as much cell division. And then the areas like that, you see it says yellow marrow. There are areas in long bones that the red bone marrow gets replaced with something called yellow marrow, which is an area to store adipose. So red bone marrow produces all these blood cell types. In kids, it's found pretty much in every single bone. In adults, this is where you would find, why has I got the line there? This is where you find it in adults. So the proximal epiphysis of femur and humerus, sternum, clavicle, vertebrae, the os coxa bones, in other words, the hip bones, the iliac crest, which is the hip part that sticks up, some of the facial bones, it said vertebrae. Yeah, a person that donates red bone marrow, they'll either get it out of their sternum or the hip bones, the iliac crest. But it's only found in certain locations in adults. Kids have it just about everywhere. Yellow bone marrow is an area that, it gets converted. Red bone marrow will get converted into yellow marrow. And all of our pictures have that. The ones I was using earlier, see up here, if you go back up to the parts of a long bone we were going over, see there's some yellow marrow. This is an adult bone. And like it was saying, in emergency situations, sometimes those will go back to red bone marrow if a person needs more red cells. Okay, a couple more things, and we're going to stop this video, and we'll start next with the other. So bone development. So let's do this one first. We'll start the next video with how the endochondral ossification takes place. So bones develop two ways, either what's called the intramembranous process or the endochondral ossification. Now, in this case, I'm going back to our blackboard. This is the PowerPoint that came from a textbook, which is this one. And you'll want to pull this up while you're going through this. So here is, in other words, we're talking about how do, now come on, does this not have a, it's got to have a, oh well. It's got some examples of spongy bone. There's some spongy bone with compact bone. So just briefly, here is an infant skull, and this is everybody's skull forms by a process called intramembranous ossification. So this is a infant skull, and you see a lot of area here. What ends up happening first is after fertilization and as a zygote is developing, the area where the head is going to be located, there are these thin sheets of fibrous connective tissue that form in those areas. And then at some point, that fibrous connective tissue, and it always starts in the center, and it will progress out, but osteoblasts will form here and convert that fibrous connective tissue into osseous tissue, which is bone tissue. And it always starts in the middle, and always progresses toward the edges. And an infant skull is not fully ossified at birth. That's what these white lines are. Now, these are called fontanelles, which are still that fibrous connective tissue, the remnants of that. That's the portions that are left. This is the top of a baby's skull, and I think everybody's seen this. You know, babies that are just born, they have that soft spot. That's that fibrous membrane. All the rest of it is bone tissue. And then this down here also, the posterior lobe, the posterior fontanelles in the back. So there's actually 4 fontanelles. This is called the anterolateral or sphenoidal fontanelle. This is the posterior lateral or mastoid fontanelle. This is the anterior fontanelle. This is the posterior fontanelle. And those white lines here are the areas between those bones that are not quite ossified. It allows the baby's skull to grow. So I'm going to go back. So right here it has the process. So bone tissue is formed directly from a fibrous connective tissue. The process occurs primarily with the broad flat bones of the skull. So where it says process, you're going to want to go to this PowerPoint that I'm claiming is the textbook one. Oops. And it starts right there with the intermembranous ossification. So bones start out as sheet-like layers of connective tissues. They are the broad flat bones. Flat bones of the skull, clavicle, sternum, and some facial bones. Osteoblasts are bone-forming cells. Now, we're just talking about the top of the skull. A lot of this, the sternum, clavicles, it's kind of skipping to the endochondral. But yeah, osteoblasts are the bone-forming cells. And so the skull, and we're really focusing on that, the skull starts out as a fibrous connective tissue. Let me bounce back over here, like that. And then osteoblasts start here, and it's kind of showing that sort of radiating out like this, and it converts all of these areas into bone tissue except for the areas that are called the fontanelles. And that'll be the last thing here. The ossification is not complete at birth. Fontanelle soft spots are the parts that have not completely ossified. Allows continued growth and enlargement of the cranium. Yes, a person's brain would be as big as a fetal skull, which is not very big, and we'd still be hiding in the bushes trying not to be eaten by things if our head stayed that small. So it allows the brain to grow. I showed you the anterior lateral or sphenoid fontanelles, and it says here they close about 3 months. This one says about a year. The big one on the top fully closes, it says, at the end of the second year. And the posterior fontanelle closes at about the second month. So that was this here is called the sphenoidal or anterior lateral. This is the posterior lateral or mastoid. The anterior fontanelle and the posterior fontanelle. So pretty simple process, and I will start the next video right here.